The night everything changed started like any other night, quiet, ordinary, and deceptively calm. My child had been slightly feverish for 2 days, nothing that seemed too alarming at first. I kept telling myself it was just a seasonal infection, something that would pass with rest, warm soup, and a mother's care. But deep down, a restless fear had already begun to grow in my chest, the kind of fear that whispers before it screams. By midnight, the fever had risen sharply. My child, my only child, was burning up. Small hands trembled, lips dry, breathing uneven. I remember sitting beside the bed, pressing a damp cloth to their forehead again and again, praying with a desperation that felt heavier than my body. Every minute stretched like an hour. Every breath my child took felt like a question I couldn't answer. That's when I made the decision. I needed help, real help, a doctor, money for treatment, anything. My savings were gone, used up on rent and basic survival after months of struggling. My husband was working out of town, unreachable at that hour. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and dialed the only people I believed would never turn me away. My parents. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then my mother answered, her voice groggy, irritated, like I had disturbed something important. "What is it? It's late," she said sharply. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "Mom, please, I need help. The baby is very sick. High fever. I think it's serious. I need money for the hospital or a ride, please. I can't do this alone." There was a long pause. For a moment, I thought maybe she hadn't heard me properly. Maybe she would suddenly panic, ask questions, rush to help like any mother would. But then my father's voice came on the line. "What kind of drama is this at this hour?" he said coldly. "It's just a fever. You always panic." I stood frozen in the dim light of my child's room, listening to my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. "It's not just a fever," I said quickly. "Their breathing is strange. I think we need a hospital, please. Just help me this once." Another pause. This one heavier. Then my mother sighed loudly. "We are not coming out at night for this nonsense. Take care of your own house. You are a mother now. Act like one." Those words hit harder than anything I had ever heard. Act like one. I looked at my child, writhing slightly in discomfort, and felt something inside me crack. "Mom, please," I whispered, my voice breaking now. "I'm begging you. I don't have anyone else." My father took the phone again. "You chose your life," he said. "Don't drag us into your responsibilities every time something goes wrong." And then, before I could say another word, the line went dead. Silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that suffocates. I stood there holding the phone, staring at the dark screen as if it could explain what had just happened. For a few seconds I couldn't move. My mind refused to accept it. Surely parents don't do this. Surely blood means something. But the truth was already sitting in the room with me. I looked at my child again. Their face was red, eyes half closed, breathing uneven. That sight shattered whatever was left of my denial. I rushed to dress them in a thin shawl, my hands clumsy, trembling, my thoughts scattered. I had no car, no money, no help, just me. I carried my child outside into the cold night air, step by step, praying I would find a rickshaw or anything that would take us to the hospital. Every sound in the street felt too loud, every shadow too sharp. I kept whispering, "Stay with me. Please stay with me," not sure if I was talking to my child or to life itself. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, I found a ride. The driver barely asked questions when he saw my panic. At the hospital, the lights were harsh, the corridors endless. Nurses moved quickly, voices overlapping, machines beeping in distant rooms. I held my child tightly as doctors took them away for treatment. And for the first time that night, I was left alone. That's when the tears came, not soft tears, not quiet ones, the kind that come from betrayal. I sat on a cold plastic chair in the waiting area, staring at my shaking hands, replaying every word my parents had said. Every rejection, every cold sentence, it didn't feel real. It felt like something you read about in stories, not something that happens to you. But it had happened, and in that moment, something inside me changed permanently. I was no longer waiting for my parents to save me. I was no longer their daughter in need of approval or comfort. I was a mother who had been abandoned at the worst possible moment, and somehow I had survived it. As the hospital doors swung open and closed around me, I made a silent promise to myself, one that no amount of pain could erase. I would never beg them again. The morning after that night did not feel like morning at all. Time had stopped being something normal and had turned into something I had to survive minute by minute. I sat in the hospital waiting area with stiff shoulders and swollen eyes, watching nurses pass by with rushed steps, hearing distant cries from other rooms, smelling antiseptic that clung to everything like a permanent memory. Inside the pediatric ward, my child was fighting to recover, and I was fighting something else entirely, collapse. The doctor finally came out sometime after dawn. His face was calm, but not relaxed. That kind of expression that tells you the situation was serious, but under control now. "We've stabilized the fever," he said gently. "It was severe dehydration and infection. You brought them in just in time. Just in time." Those words should have brought relief, but instead, they cracked something inside me again. I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My throat felt sealed shut. I walked into the room slowly. My child was lying there with a small Roman IV-line attached, sleeping fitfully. Their face looked peaceful now, but fragile like glass that had almost shattered completely. I sat beside the bed and held their tiny hand. And I made another promise, not out loud this time. This one burned into me silently. I will never let you reach that edge again. But promises require strength, and strength requires survival. The hospital bill arrived like a second blow. Numbers I could not afford. Amounts that felt like a different language. I remember staring at the paper, my fingers tightening around it until it crumpled slightly at the edges. I had no savings left, no backup, no one to call, except I didn't call my parents. I didn't even consider it. Something had shifted permanently inside me after that night. Not hatred, something colder, quieter. A decision. I sold what little I had, my jewelry, a few personal things. I borrowed from a neighbor I barely knew, swallowing my pride like broken glass. Every step felt humiliating, but necessary. Survival does not ask for dignity, it demands action. Days turned into nights inside that hospital room. My child slowly recovered. Color returned to their cheeks. Their voice came back in small whispers. The first time they smiled again, even faintly, I had to turn my face away so they wouldn't see me cry. Because I didn't want them to remember me as broken, only as present. When we finally left the hospital, the sun felt too bright, too loud. I carried my child home in a quiet taxi, watching the city move like nothing had happened. Life outside continued without pause, as if my world had not almost ended. But mine had changed. The house felt different that day. Smaller somehow, or maybe I was just no longer the same person inside it. I cleaned it slowly, carefully, like I was rebuilding something fragile. Every movement felt deliberate. Every breath felt earned. My child played quietly in the corner, recovering strength, occasionally calling out for me just to make sure I was still there. And I always answered immediately, "Yes, I'm here," always, but nights were the hardest because nights brought memory. I would sit by the window long after my child slept, replaying the voices of my parents in my mind. My mother's irritated sigh, my father's cold dismissal, the line going dead. Not once did they ask again. Not once did they check. It wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. That realization didn't make me cry anymore. It made something else settle inside me. A quiet acceptance that I could no longer rely on the idea of family the way I once had. A week later, I received a message from my mother. Not a call, a message. Hope everything is fine now. You always overreact. I stared at it for a long time. No apology, no concern. Just that same familiar tone, dismissive, minimizing, unchanged. I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted it, not out of anger, out of finality. That was the moment I understood the truth clearly. They were not coming to save me, because they never believed I needed saving. And I had spent years trying to prove otherwise. I stopped waiting after that. I focused entirely on my child and rebuilding life in silence. I took small freelance work at night. I learned to stretch every coin, every hour, every piece of energy I had left. Exhaustion became normal. So did determination. Slowly, painfully, things began to shift. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were stabilizing, and somewhere in that stability, something unexpected grew inside me. Not revenge in the dramatic sense people imagine, but clarity, because I began to see everything differently. The patterns, the neglect, the emotional distance I had normalized for years. That night had not created the truth, it had revealed it, and the more I saw it clearly, the less power it had over me. A year passed like that, quiet, heavy, but forward, moving. My child grew stronger, healthier, happier. Their laughter returned fully, filling the house in a way I had once feared I might never hear again. And me, I changed too, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. I no longer begged for support. I no longer expected warmth where none existed, and I no longer feared being alone, because I had already survived the worst version of alone. And I had done it without them. A year does not sound like much when people say it casually, but when you live every single day rebuilding a life that once nearly collapsed, a year becomes something else entirely, thousands of small battles stitched together, each one invisible to outside world. For me, that year was survival turned into structure. At first, it was chaos disguised as routine. I would wake up before sunrise, not because I was rested, but because there was too much to do and not enough hours in a day. My child's school forms, medical follow-ups, household expenses, and the constant pressure of earning enough to keep the lights on, all of it sat on my shoulders like an unrelenting weight. But slowly, something shifted. Pain stopped being only pain, it became fuel. I started taking small freelance work, writing, basic online tasks, anything that could bring in even a little income. The nights became my working hours. The house would fall silent after my child slept, and I would sit with a dim light, typing until my fingers ached. There were nights I felt like I couldn't continue. But then I would look at my child sleeping peacefully, breathing steadily, no longer connected to hospital machines or feverish panic, and I would keep going. Because that difference mattered more than my exhaustion. Months passed like that. Little by little, things began to stabilize. Not dramatically, not magically, but steadily, like water slowly filling an empty space. We moved from crisis to routine, from panic to planning, from fear to something closer to peace. My child returned fully to school, laughing again with friends, carrying drawings home that were messy and beautiful in the way only children's art can be. Every time I saw them smile freely, something inside me softened, but also hardened in a different way, because I remembered what almost happened, and I remembered who was not there. My parents never called properly again. Occasionally, there were short messages, cold, casual, as if nothing significant had ever occurred between us. How are things now? You should manage your life better. No apology, no acknowledgement, just distance dressed as concern. I stopped responding entirely, not out of anger anymore, out of clarity, because I realized something important. They were not confused about what they did. They simply did not see it as something worth changing. And I could not rebuild my life around people who refused to see my reality. So I stopped looking back. Instead, I built forward. There was a small breakthrough in the middle of that year. One freelance client who consistently appreciated my work. It wasn't a life-changing income, but it was steady, reliable. For someone who had lived in constant uncertainty, that reliability felt like oxygen. I remember the first time I paid all my bills on time without borrowing anything. I sat quietly afterward, staring at the receipt in my hand, realizing how rare peace had become in my life. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival finally exhaling. My child noticed the change too. Children always do, even when adults think they don't. They started seeing me less stressed, less panicked, more present. One evening, they looked up at me and said something I will never forget. "Mom, you smile more now." I smiled back, but my throat tightened, because they didn't know the cost behind that smile. They didn't know the nights I had cried silently after they slept. The days I had eaten less so they could eat properly. The constant fear I had learned to hide behind calm eyes. But they didn't need to know that. They only needed to feel safe, and that was something I could finally give them. As the months passed, I began to notice something else. I was no longer waiting for anything from my parents. Not love, not validation, not even regret. They had become something distant in my mind, not erased, but no longer central. Like a closed door I no longer walked toward, and that realization was strangely freeing. One evening, while my child was doing homework at the table, I stood by the window and looked out at the fading sky. The air was warm, carrying the sounds of the neighborhood, people cooking, children playing, life continuing in ordinary ways. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was drowning in my own past. I felt grounded. I had built something from nothing, not perfect, not easy, but mine, a home where my child no longer felt danger in illness because I knew exactly what to do now. A life where I no longer waited for rescue, because I had become the one who rescued us. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the exhaustion and quiet pride, I understood something clearly. The version of me who begged for help that night no longer existed. She had survived, and what remained was someone stronger. Someone who had learned, painfully but permanently, that love is not always where you expect it, and strength is often born in the places where love fails you most. It was an ordinary evening when everything changed again. The kind of evening I had grown used to, calm, predictable, almost healing in its simplicity. My child was at the table finishing homework, occasionally humming to themselves in concentration. The house smelled faintly of tea and warm food. For once, there was no urgency in my chest, no fear waiting behind every moment. Life had finally settled into something that resembled peace. Then came the knock, not loud, not aggressive, just 3 careful taps on the door. At first, I didn't move. People rarely came unannounced anymore. Deliveries, neighbors, sometimes a friend of my child. But something about this knock felt different, hesitant, almost uncertain. I walked to the door slowly and opened it, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My parents stood there. Not the version of them I remembered from years of authority and distance. Not the strong, unquestionable figures who once made me feel small in my own desperation. They looked diminished. My mother's face had lines deeper than I remembered. her eyes carrying something I had never seen before. My father stood slightly behind her, shoulders lowered, as if unsure whether he had the right to take up space at all. There was silence between us, heavy, uncomfortable, honest. For a few seconds none of us spoke. I felt something stir inside me, not anger, not panic, but a calm awareness. The kind that comes when a long, awaited moment finally arrives, but no longer holds the power you once gave it. My mother finally broke the silence. "Can we come in?" she asked softly. Her voice did not carry the sharpness I remembered. It sounded smaller now, tired, almost careful. I didn't answer immediately. My eyes moved from her to my father. He avoided my gaze. And in that moment, a memory flashed through me, the night my child was burning with fever, my trembling voice begging for help, and the cold refusal that ended with a disconnected call. I didn't feel the same pain anymore, but I remembered it clearly. Finally, I stepped aside. They entered slowly, as if unsure of the ground beneath them. I closed the door behind them, and suddenly the house felt different, not unsafe, but charged, like the air before a storm that had already passed long ago. My child peeked from the table, curious. "Who are they?" they asked innocently. I hesitated only for a second. "Old family," I said quietly, not cruel, not emotional, just factual. My parents flinched slightly at the words, but said nothing. We sat in the living room, the same room where I had once held my sick child through sleepless nights, where I had made silent promises to survive without anyone's help. Now those same walls witnessed something else, confrontation without shouting, pain without tears. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she placed them in her lap. "We heard. You managed everything on your own," she said carefully. I nodded once. "Yes." Another silence followed. My father cleared his throat, but his voice came out weaker than I expected. "We didn't realize it was that serious back then," he said. That sentence, so small, so simple, and yet it carried the weight of everything that had happened. I looked at him directly for the first time since they entered. "You didn't ask," I said calmly. "You didn't come. You didn't check again." My voice was steady, not raised. Not shaking, just true. My mother looked down. "We thought you were overreacting." She whispered. There it was. The same sentence from that night, echoed again. Softer now, but unchanged in meaning. Something inside me shifted, but not violently. Not painfully, just firmly, because I realized something important in that moment. They hadn't changed the past. They were only finally seeing it, and I had already lived through what they were just beginning to understand. My father exhaled slowly. "We made a mistake," he said. We didn't understand what you were going through." I nodded again. "Yes, you didn't." Another silence followed, longer this time. My child returned to their room quietly, sensing the heaviness in the air without needing explanations. I was grateful for that. Some conversations belong only to adults who created them. When the room was quiet again, my mother's eyes filled with tears. "We are sorry," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "We didn't know how to fix it then. We still don't know now." I studied her face. There was no performance in her expression, no manipulation, just regret, late, heavy, and inconvenient. And yet, regret does not undo survival. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "I almost lost my child that night," I said softly. I sat alone in a hospital thinking I had nobody left. My voice didn't rise, but something in it changed the room. My father's head lowered further. "I know," he said quietly. That surprised me. For the first time, there was no defense. No excuses, only acknowledgement. But acknowledgement is not repair, and I had learned the difference too well. I stood up slowly. I built everything after that. I continued, without you, without anyone. They both looked at me now. Really looked, as if they were seeing the version of me they had once dismissed. I didn't come here to hurt you, I said, and I didn't stay alive waiting for an apology. The room felt still, not tense anymore, just final. My mother wiped her tears but said nothing. My father nodded slightly, like he finally understood something he had missed for too long. I don't know what you want from us, he admitted, and for the first time I believed him because the truth was simple. I didn't want anything from them anymore. Not the past, not the apology, not even the version of love I once thought I needed. I walked to the door and opened it again. The evening air outside was calm, unchanged. I want you to understand, I said quietly, that I survived what you left me in. They didn't argue. They didn't respond. They just stood there. Two people finally facing the consequence of a moment they once dismissed as unimportant. And I realized then, the knock on my door hadn't been the beginning of their return. It had been the end of my waiting.